ultimately, I want you all to leave here today learning something new about closing your first apartment syndication deal or being ready to do so. So, I know today's real estate market all across the country, it's really a seller's market. So, it's a very competitive place for buyers to be buying real estate right now. But there are good deals out there everywhere across the country. You just have to look at a massive volume of deals to find the good ones. So, that being said, use the chat box. I'm going to do my best to watch the chat box as well as I go. So, let me pull that up here. And for today, um, we are going to get through closing your first apartment syndication deal. So, kind of a couple of main things to start with when you're thinking about closing your first deal. Having strict criteria will yield you better results. And then the timing of closing steps of what, who, and when. So, step number one, like I was saying, it's a competitive marketplace for buyers at the moment, right? There are a ton of deals being traded. There's a lot of capital available. Lending is very competitive. So we're able to get good terms on debt to capitalize these deals. And really, you need to have very strict criteria to find that first deal and close your first apartment syndication deal. And starting from a very high level, we're going to work our way in on strict criteria. So, if you are a solo entrepreneur, solo real estate investor, you don't have enough time to compete against a group that has a team of people. So, starting out from a super high level perspective, if you think about the geography of the United States, talk about kind of four quadrants to the US. You have the West Coast, which encompasses North and South. So, I'm going to put everything into the West Coast. You have the Midwest, you have the Southeast US, and then you have the Northeast US. Those four quadrants of real estate are very different and unique. And if you are a single shingle entrepreneur, you cannot look at deals and stretch yourself thin across every region in the United States. And so, that being said, if you kind of take a top down approach and really look at things, you need to have your criteria funnel you deals, and your criteria will work for you as it funnels things in. And so, number one piece of criteria is pick your geography, but also pick your specific cities. We have about 10 or so team members on our team at passiveinvesting.com, and we look at about 6 markets in the US. Um, so I say that because I want you to think about your specific scenario and what markets you are going after. So, a couple of things, like I was saying. So, criteria number one is pick the region of the country you're going to invest in. And then step number two is pick the specific market. So, it is not acceptable for you to say you want to buy deals in the Southeast US. That's a good step for your first piece of criteria. You're going to look at deals in the Southeast US, but then you need to take it a step further and say, I'm going to look at deals specifically in Jacksonville, Florida, and Greenville, South Carolina. And I might look at deals in Raleigh, North Carolina. If you are a solo entrepreneur real estate investor and you're trying to do everything on your own for your first apartment syndication, I think you should probably have about 2 to 3 very specific markets that you look at, because you cannot have a depth and quality relationship with either brokers, owners, or property managers if you are looking at deals in 10 different markets around the Southeast US. So you have to be strict in your criteria. So you're only looking at good deals that qualify for you to buy them. So, one of the things that I personally struggled with when I was getting started is I thought any deal was worthy to look at. And really, that's not the case. You get distracted by the shiny object syndrome of, someone will send you a deal in San Francisco, California, and it's the greatest apartment deal in the history of apartment deals, and you're looking at this deal and then it doesn't work out, and then you're looking at a deal in Michigan and that's a bad deal, and then you're looking at a deal in Ohio or in Florida, and you have to have the expertise of the market. You need to know what price points deals should be trading at. You need to know average rents in that area, and so having strict criteria allows you to be more so an expert and know the ins and outs. And so, if you have said this over the beginning part of this year, over the last 6 months, if you said there's no good deals out there, I'm guessing you don't have strict enough criteria. You need to be looking for stricter criteria. And so, um, I'm going to come to a couple of questions in just a minute. So I am seeing these come in, but let me continue on my criteria funnel. So pick your geography of the US, pick your specific submarkets. If you are a solo entrepreneur, you probably want to only look at about two specific cities in the US that you want to buy deals in. If you have a team of people, maybe you want to look at between 5 and 8 markets. If you have a large team of people, maybe you're going to look at 10 plus different cities. But again, you need to have the depth, the expertise to really understand what the fundamentals of apartments are doing in those specific markets. So now that you've got your region of the US, you've got your criteria of cities. If a deal gets sent to you that is not in your two cities, if you're a solo entrepreneur, you should not even open it. You should not even do anything with it. Don't waste your time because it doesn't fit your criteria. Step number 3 in your funnel, again, you want to be driving quality deals that you're going to spend time underwriting and talking to the broker about. So, step 3 is you need to figure out what sort of dollar amount you can afford. So, if a deal comes to you and it's $100 million deal and you've never bought an apartment community before, you don't need to spend any time looking at that. It's not worth your effort. It would not be possible for you to close that deal on your first try. So you need to figure out, and this is a problem that you can solve by working backwards. So understanding how much equity you can raise for your first deal is going to give you the range of apartment size that you can afford to be looking at. So, if you think you can raise $1 million for your first apartment syndication deal, you should be looking for a deal that is about 3 million in size. And the high level numbers that I'm working on there is typically a loan is going to be about 70% LTV, and you're going to have some closing costs and other fees associated with that. And so 30% of 3 million is 900,000 plus 100,000 in fees, closing costs, expenses. You should be looking for a deal size about 3 million. if you can raise $1 million in equity. If you think you can raise $10 million in equity, well, 10x that purchase price, and you should be looking at $30 million deals. The the deal size funnel step 3 is very important because there are far too many people out there who spend a bunch of time on deals that they can't necessarily afford or don't have enough equity to be able to afford. And so you have to get started, and buying your first deal is going to get you that experience to build up from there. So I know you've probably heard people say going larger is always easier and it's better from a scalability perspective, but you have to get started with your first deal somewhere. And so get started with something that you can afford to do from an equity perspective. So if you think you can raise $1 million, you should be looking at deals that are $2 to $4 million in a purchase price range. And that's going to funnel in so many deals. If the deal is 6 million, you need to pass on it. Don't even spend any time looking at it. If the deal is less than $1 million, you probably don't want to spend your time looking at that stuff either, because it's going to be a little too small for you. But that 2 to 4 million range is going to be perfect for where you are at today. And again, you need to buy your first deal today where you're at. Don't think that you're going to come out and buy a $30 million deal if you've never raised money before, because you're going to need to raise about $10 million. So that is something that I think a lot of people struggle with. Again, when I hear there's no good deals out there, I always think about how strict is your criteria. Are there no good deals out there because you're looking at all of these different locations and dollar amount ranges? However, if you say my criteria is the Southeast US, I'm looking for deals in Charleston, South Carolina, and Orlando, Florida only, and I'm looking for deals between $2 and $4 million, you're going to find a deal. You just need to look at a bunch of deals that are in those two cities that are priced between 2 and 4 million bucks, and that's it. Don't spend any time looking at a deal that's $15 million. Don't spend any time looking at a deal that's $1 million. Look for a deal that is 2 to 4 million, period. And be so diligent and strict on that criteria that if a broker calls you, you just say, hey, I don't have time. It's not in my criteria. Or here's my criteria in 30 seconds. Orlando, Florida, Charleston, South Carolina, 2 to 4 million, and go. Find me those deals and we'll underwrite as many as we possibly can. And you're going to get such better results. So, again, if you've said there's not a good deal out there today, excuse me, get your criteria stricter and you're going to find deals that fit, and you'll find some good deals out there. Let me take a pause for just a second and go to the chat box. So again, use the chat box if you have any questions. I'm going to address those now. Jack, thank you for being here. We certainly love the enthusiasm of all of the young people fresh out of college. I think you're in a great spot. Stay focused on real estate, my friend. Brian, let's see. Your question here. Do you see any reason why it will get easier for buyers in the market in the foreseeable future? Um, I don't think it is. Um, I don't think it's hard for buyers right now. I think it's a competitive market for buyers and for sellers. And I think, Brian, if you have that strict criteria, you can find some good deals and get some deals under contract. You just have to look at a much larger volume. And so, one of the things between, Dan, Brandon, and myself, the three partners at passiveinvesting.com, we are always just grateful to have a team of people so we can look at a lot and a lot and a lot of deals. If you are again, a solo entrepreneur trying to do this on your own, it's very challenging to look at enough deals, have enough investor conversations, meet with enough brokers and property managers to find a lot of good deals. You might just find one or two for the year if you're doing it all on your own. And so, Brian, I think the way to make it easier for buyers is to have a team around you where you can look at a bunch of deals and find the good ones and try to be very competitive to get those deals under contract. Kaba, for syndications, are there lenders who lend 90% LTV or 85, or is that impossible to find such a lender? There are lenders that do that. I would say it is probably challenging to get a lender to go up to 85 or 90% LTV on your first apartment syndication deal. If you don't have any experience in the space, they may be a bit uncomfortable going to that leverage amount. And so, what I would say is you got to get comfortable with how much equity you can raise, and it's a balancing act, right? How much equity can you raise, the size of the deal, and what purchase price range should you be looking at? And so if it was me starting out, I would not bank on the fact that a lender is going to do 85% plus LTV. Um, Depending on the size of the deal, if you're looking at a $3 million deal, I think you could find a local bank or a lender to get up to 80% LTV, which certainly helps reduce the amount of equity you need to raise. But um, that's one of those activities you should do for your area. Have a conversation with 3 to 5 different lenders and see what their lending appetite is at the moment, what LTVs they can get to. A lot of lenders are restricted by DSCR, debt service coverage ratio. And so, despite a lender may market and say, oh, yeah, we can get up to 90% LTV, they realistically can never get there if they need to hit a 1.25 DSCR. And if that term DSCR is new to you, go to Google, type in debt service coverage ratio, and read a little bit about that so you know how to speak to a lender when you're asking them about LTV range. So, Kaba, to answer your question, I don't think it is reasonable to expect 85% plus LTV. And so I think have some conversations with folks around you from a lending space and figure out where you could be on your first deal. Some folks have raised their hand. If you all want to just ask a question in the chat box, just pull up the chat box and type your question into the chat box, and I'll be happy to get to those in the chat box there. So that being said, I'm going to do a quick time check. It's about 11:26 or so, and I'm going to go for maybe the next 5 minutes talking about the timing of closing steps. And then I'll open it back up to any questions. So use the chat box, ask any questions that you have, and we will go into kind of our next topic around closing your first deal. So now that we have our strict criteria, your real job is to look at as many deals that fit your criteria, make as many offers as you can, get into as many best and finals as you can, and hopefully get one deal under contract, right? Get your first apartment syndication deal under contract. And then now we're going to talk about the steps of closing. So once you get the verbal deal awarded to you, so the broker will call and say, "Hey, congratulations, the seller has selected you as the buyer. Um, Here's a signed LOI." Or, maybe they don't even sign the LOI from a seller perspective, and they just say, "Hey, let's get a purchase and sale agreement, the PSA, going." And so step one is to work as diligently and as quickly as you can to get that PSA reviewed by all parties and signed by all parties. It's not uncommon that a seller may award the deal to you, but may entertain other offers if they come back in, and you could theoretically lose the deal if you are not quick in getting a purchase and sale agreement signed. So as the old saying goes, it's not a deal until it's kind of done or signed and executed on the page on the purchase and sale agreement by both parties. So work as diligently as you can to get that done and have both parties fully sign it, and then get your due diligence process started right away. And so I'm going to kind of rapid fire the steps to close. If you need to pause or rewatch this so you can get these steps to close, please do so. But once you get the PSA signed and executed, that's going to immediately start your due diligence process. So you need to be engaging a lender to get your debt lined up. You need to be working with that lender on all of the loan documents, all of the lender closing checklist criteria. You need to be forming your LLCs, getting your legal items done with your attorney. So, operating agreements, management agreements, whatever sort of legal checklist items, you need to be working on that again as soon as you get the property under an executed purchase and sale agreement. At the same time, of working with the lender, working with your legal team, you need to be working with the current property operations in the seller to do unit walks, property inspections. So, you need to go out to the property, walk all the units, check the condition of the property, audit the property financials, both from an electronic perspective, but also physically at the property. So, working with the current management company or manager to understand the ins and outs of the financials, auditing all of the resident leases to make sure that what the rent roll says matches what the signed lease says they are paying in rent. Sometimes there can be a variable in those, and you need to work to get those corrected. And so as soon as you get the property under contract, it's kind of three parts, right? It's the lender engagement, it's the legal engagement, and it's your physical and financial due diligence on the property and going through the entire property. So those three things are key in that due diligence period, which is typically about 30 days long. Once you get through that due diligence period, typically you have another 30 days to close the property. And really, what you're doing in that next 30-day period, once all of your due diligence items are done, your title and survey are completed and signed off, your lender inspection is done, your property condition assessment report is done for the lender, a PCA typically, and maybe an environmental study. All of those things you try to get done as quickly as possible in your due diligence window. So the last 30 days, typically, you're just working to close the property. So it would be working with the lender to finalize any documents, making sure the lender is on track, making sure lender legal and your legal team have everything ironed out and ready to go for a nice, clean transition. And then probably about 10 days out from closing, your attorney is going to be working with the seller's attorney to get all of the legal documents ironed out for the sale and getting ready with the title company to sign all the documents that are required to close the property. Outside of the actual closing of the property, that last 30-day window, you also want to be simultaneously working with your property management company to get them onboarded and prepared to take over and transition the property the day of closing. So it's why I said earlier on, if you're a solo entrepreneur and you're trying to do this on your own, there's a lot of moving parts and people to stay up with on just trying to close this deal, which I think would really prevent you from looking at a bunch of new deals if you're trying to close one deal and do a great job to do that. So in addition to the items that I mentioned about working with the lender, working with legal, and working with the property operations and your property management company, you also have to be managing investors at the same time. And so having investor calls, talking about your investment opportunity, getting the private placement memorandum out to investors, the PPM, getting folks to sign that, setting up your bank account for the operations, having investors wire money in for their investment amount, confirming with the investors that you receive their funds. Again, it's a lot of different moving pieces and parts. And so typically what we do from an investor perspective, once we get a deal under contract, we send it out to our investors. We'll email out all the information. We'll have a webinar about it. We'll answer any questions, have phone calls with people. We'll give a funding deadline to those who are committed to invest in the opportunity. And we'll get organized and have and make sure that we get all the funds in prior to us closing the property. Typically, we like to try to get all of the funds in once our due diligence ends. So again, it's a smooth and seamless transition over the remaining 30 days per the purchase and sale agreement to close on the property. So again, a lot of different moving pieces and parts, but that's the who, the what, and the when of the timing that needs to happen. So again, strict criteria, and then it's time to go to work. And there's a lot of moving pieces and parts once you get a deal under contract to get it closed. And so don't be overwhelmed. Work through this. Always have a mentor or someone, a friend that you can phone who's bought an apartment deal before that can help you through the process and work through any hoops that may come up or challenges that you may need to overcome in that process. That's really the meat of the presentation that I wanted to cover today. I know we've got about 25 minutes left, but we'll take all of the questions that we can in the chat box, and then we'll wrap things up here. If there's no further questions, we'll wrap up early, and that will be it for today. So I've got a question in here for anyone else on the webinar. If you have questions, put them in the chat box. There is no such thing as a bad question. So feel free to ask anything you have, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. So Keith in here, do you have any tips on how to narrow down your deal inflow and funnel to match your criteria? How to narrow down to only the brokers who operate in those areas and price ranges. So I would, the second question, I would only work with brokers who have deals in the markets that you want to invest in. A broker could have another market that they cover. For example, if you wanted to buy deals only in Orlando, Florida, that broker may cover Jacksonville. They may not be able to set up your email to only receive Orlando deals, but if you get a deal in Jacksonville and it's not part of your criteria, just delete it. Don't even open it, just delete it. And that will help minimize the influx of deals. If you can also talk to the brokers in those areas and say, hey, I only want deals in Orlando, Florida, and in this price range, can you set up my email drip criteria to this specific range? Then perfect. But again, if you get a deal from a broker that's $50 million in Jacksonville or $50 million in Orlando, just delete it, and it's going to reduce your inflow. So you're not looking at shiny objects all the time, right? Just get rid of the junk that doesn't fit your specific criteria. And your junk may be someone else's treasure. So it's okay to just delete something and get it off of your desk, get it off your inbox. Don't even spend any more time thinking about it. Just get it gone. Your first question, Keith, of narrowing down the funnel to match your criteria. Again, put pen to paper and literally write down what markets you're going to go after, what price range you're going to go after, also what type of apartment you're going to go after. Do you want something that has only been built in 2000 or newer? Are you looking for a um, a higher end property, or are you looking for more of an affordable housing area? So maybe you have a criteria that says we want rents that are 900 to $1,000 per unit, or we want rents that are 1250 and up per unit. So have those criterias, and that's going to really, really reduce the junk that you get in and give you better results of what you want to see. Kenneth, do you have a standard list of property inspection structural report? Um, uh, Lenders will require what's called a property condition assessment report, PCA. If you probably Google property condition assessment report, you'll get a bunch of samples online. These are typically 80 pages plus in a PDF, extremely, extremely thorough. They kind of go through every nook and cranny of the property. So check that out. Very straightforward there. What structure do you use, Jack, for the LP, for the entity setup? LLC or LP, a limited partnership, work just fine. Again, I would confirm with your legal counsel on what's needed. What percentages do you offer them? Um, I would encourage you to check out some of our previous YouTube videos about structuring deals, and operating LP, limited partners, and GPs. A lot of great information, much more specific into the percentages and things like that. That'll be much more useful. Um, let's see here. Kaba, you got a question about getting funds in from investors before putting offers in. Um, could you please elaborate on this? So we have never taken money from an investor before having a deal under contract. The reason for that is you're tying up investor capital when you don't have a deal to place their money in. And so they might not earn a return on that capital for 3 months to 12 months or until you get your first deal. So I wouldn't encourage you to actually take funds and put it into a bank account waiting for you to get a deal. What I would do, Kaba, is have conversations with investors that say, hey, would you be interested in investing like in something like this apartment community when I get the next one under contract, or when I get my first one under contract? And once you do, now it's go time, because you know you're going to close on this specific deal with this specific private placement memorandum that outlines all of the investment risks, all of the investment returns, and it gives the investors that tangible ability to say, okay, my money is going to buy this property and I'm comfortable with that. So once you get a deal under contract, you would immediately open a bank account. And once you have investors review all of the PPM materials and physically sign the PPM, then you can go ahead and accept their funds and go and close on that deal. Now, if you don't end up closing on that deal, you're going to need to return all investor capital. So make sure that your bank account is set up to, again, just hold that money kind of in like an escrow, where it's not being used for anything. It's just sitting there waiting to close on the deal. So that would be the timing, that I would encourage you to do. Don't take money now. Get investor money once you have a deal under contract and once they've reviewed and signed everything. So that's all the questions I have in here. If you have any more, feel free to ask them in the next 30 seconds. Otherwise, we will wrap up. So, my final closing public service announcement: there is no webinar next week, Tuesday. Please have a great, long holiday weekend. Happy 4th of July for everyone in the United States. Those of you outside of the US, celebrate alongside us for, the US Independence Day on July 4th. We will not have a webinar next week on July 6th, but the following webinar, go ahead and register for it. Use the link in the chat box. It will be on July 13th. And there is a link in the chat box. So happy 4th of July. We will not see you next week, but we will see you on July 13th. The link is in the chat box. Thank you all for being here, participating, asking some really good questions, and go out and buy your first syndication deal. Or if you've already bought one, go get your second one. And we'll catch you on July 13th for the next webinar. Thank you, everyone.